What's going on, everyone? And welcome back. So, you've already learned the basics of tanking. You know how to keep aggro. You understand your defensive cooldowns. You've cleared a few mythic dungeons. Maybe you've even started raiding. But now you've reached a point where you're asking yourself, how do I become a really good tank? Because here's the truth. The difference between an average tank and an elite tank isn't gear. It isn't having the strongest class. And it definitely isn't just surviving. The best tanks control the pace of the dungeon. They know every dangerous pull before it happens. They make healers' jobs easier. They maximize their group's damage. And they can recover from mistakes that would wipe most groups. Today's guide is all about taking your tanking to the next level. We're going beyond beginner tips. We'll cover advanced pull strategies, cooldown planning, threat optimization, positioning, boss control, group leadership, and the habits that separate top-tier tanks from everyone else. If you master the concepts in this video, you'll become the kind of tank that players immediately add to their friends' list after a dungeon. Let's get started. Section 1. The tank is the leader. One of the biggest mindset changes advanced tanks make is realizing something important. You're not just another player. You're the leader. Whether you're running a mythic dungeon or progressing through a raid, everyone naturally follows your decisions. Your pull size determines the pace. Your positioning determines where the DPS can safely stand. Your route determines how quickly the dungeon progresses. Even the healer is reacting to your decisions. That means your job starts before combat even begins. Elite tanks always know where they're pulling next, which enemies are dangerous, which interrupts are required, which cooldown they'll use, which defensive abilities they'll save. Average tanks react. Elite tanks prepare. The more prepared you are before every pull, the smoother every run becomes. Section 2. Planning every pull. One of the fastest ways to improve your tanking is learning to think 2 pulls ahead. Most tanks only focus on the enemies they're currently fighting. Great tanks are already thinking about the next group. Ask yourself, can I combine these packs? Does the healer have enough mana? Are my defensive cooldowns available? Do my DPS players still have major cooldowns? Can this pull be skipped? Should I save Bloodlust for later? These decisions separate average dungeon runs from incredibly efficient ones. Another important concept is identifying priority enemies. Not every monster deserves equal attention. Some enemies cast deadly spells. Others apply dangerous debuffs. Others explode when they die. Learning which enemies matter most allows you to position them correctly and interrupt the abilities that actually threaten your group. Dungeon knowledge is one of the greatest sources of tank power. Not better gear. Knowledge. Section 3. Perfect defensive cooldown rotation. One of the biggest mistakes tanks make is treating defensive cooldowns like emergency buttons. They wait, and wait, and wait, until their health suddenly drops to 10%. Then they panic. Elite tanks don't play that way. Instead, they rotate defensives throughout the dungeon. For example, imagine you have 3 major cooldowns. Instead of saving all 3 for one dangerous moment, use one for pull A, one for pull C, one for the boss. By the time you've cycled through them, the first cooldown is often ready again. This creates almost constant defensive coverage. Another important principle is layering cooldowns. Avoid stacking every defensive at the same time unless absolutely necessary. If you activate everything together, you'll become nearly invincible for a few seconds, then completely vulnerable afterward. Instead, spread them intelligently. Small cooldown, then medium, then major. This keeps your survivability much more consistent. Section 4. Positioning like a veteran. Positioning is one of the most overlooked skills in tanking. A few steps in the wrong direction can cost your group thousands of damage, or even cause a wipe. When fighting trash packs, your goal is to group enemies tightly together. Why? Because almost every DPS class has powerful area of effect abilities. If enemies are spread across the room, your DPS players lose a tremendous amount of efficiency. At the same time, be careful not to face dangerous frontal attacks toward your party. Whenever possible, keep enemies grouped. Keep bosses facing away from the group. Avoid unnecessary movement. Move only when mechanics require it. One common mistake newer tanks make is constantly dragging enemies around. Every time you move unnecessarily, melee DPS lose uptime, and casters may need to reposition. Sometimes the best movement is no movement at all. Now that we've covered leadership, pull planning, cooldown management, and positioning, it's time to dive into some of the advanced mechanics that truly separate good tanks from great ones. In the next section, we'll talk about threat optimization, healer awareness, boss control, advanced mythic routing, communication, and the biggest mistakes even experienced tanks still make. Section 5. Mastering Threat Generation. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood mechanics in tanking. Threat. Most players think threat only matters during the first few seconds of a pull, but experienced tanks know it's something you manage throughout the entire fight. A great DPS player is constantly pushing their damage higher. If you're not generating enough threat, enemies will eventually start turning toward your teammates. One enemy attacking your healer instead of you can quickly spiral into a wipe. That's why elite tanks don't simply use one threat ability and forget about it. They're constantly refreshing threat on priority targets. One technique many experienced tanks use is target swapping. Instead of tunnel visioning a single enemy, they rotate attacks across the entire pack to make sure every dangerous target stays focused on them. Another important trick is opening every pull aggressively. Don't slowly walk into a pack. Engage with your strongest threat-generating abilities immediately. This allows your DPS players to start dealing damage much earlier without worrying about pulling aggro. The faster your group can safely begin their rotations, the faster the dungeon becomes. Section 6. Understanding your healer. One of the biggest differences between average tanks and elite tanks is this. Elite tanks don't only watch themselves. They watch their healer. Before every large pull, quickly ask yourself, how much mana does my healer have? Did they just use a major cooldown? Are they currently moving? Did they just recover from a difficult pull? Many dungeon wipes happen because tanks continue chain pulling while their healer has almost no mana left. The healer never says anything. The tank keeps running. The next pull begins. Then everyone dies. It wasn't because the tank lacked survivability. It was because they ignored their team's resources. A great tank understands that pacing isn't only about speed. It's about consistency. Sometimes slowing down for 5 seconds saves 2 minutes of running back after a wipe. Another habit worth developing is watching your healer's position. If your healer gets caught behind terrain or crowd-controlled by an enemy, charging into another massive pull usually ends badly. Good tanks lead. Great tanks adapt. Section 7. Boss Positioning and Control. Boss fights are where advanced positioning really starts to matter. Your goal isn't just surviving the boss. It's making the encounter easier for everyone else. Whenever possible, position bosses so that melee DPS can attack comfortably from behind or the sides. Keep frontal cone attacks facing away from the group. Avoid constantly spinning the boss. Every unnecessary movement forces your DPS to reposition, reducing their overall damage. Another advanced technique is controlling boss movement instead of reacting to it. If you already know where the next mechanic will happen, start positioning the boss before it occurs. That way the transition feels smooth instead of chaotic. You'll notice that experienced raid tanks almost never look rushed. They're always one mechanic ahead. That's because they've already planned the encounter before it even started. Section 8. Advanced Mythic Routing. If you're serious about pushing high mythic keys, routing becomes one of the most important skills you can develop. A dungeon isn't just a collection of random enemy packs. It's a route. Every pull affects the next one. Elite tanks memorize efficient paths through each dungeon. They know which packs can be skipped, which enemies should be pulled together, which cooldowns will be available, where bloodlust should be used, where dangerous mechanics overlap. This knowledge dramatically speeds up dungeon clears. Another advanced habit is adjusting your route based on your group. Maybe your AoE damage is incredible. You can make larger pulls. Maybe your healer is still learning. Smaller, safer pulls become the better choice. There's no such thing as one perfect route. The best tanks constantly adapt. We've covered leadership, positioning, threat, healer awareness, and advanced routing. In the final section of this guide, we'll go over the mindset of elite tanks, communication tips, the biggest mistakes even experienced players still make, and the habits that separate the top 1% of tanks from everyone else. Section 9. Communication wins dungeons. One of the most underrated skills a tank can develop has nothing to do with gear, talents, or even mechanics. It's communication. You don't need to constantly talk. You don't need to write an essay before every pull. But giving your group clear information makes every run smoother. For example, before a dangerous pull you can simply say, "We're pulling both packs together," or "Save interrupts for the caster," or "Using Bloodlust on the next boss." These short callouts prepare your group before anything happens. Good communication also builds confidence. When players know what the tank is planning, they're far more likely to trust your decisions. Another important habit is staying calm after mistakes. Every dungeon has moments where something goes wrong. Maybe a patrol joins the fight. Maybe someone accidentally pulls another pack. Maybe an interrupt gets missed. Elite tanks don't panic. They immediately switch into recovery mode. Use defensives. Reposition enemies. Call for crowd control. Stabilize the situation. The faster you recover, the less likely the mistake turns into a wipe. Leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about responding well when they happen. Section 10. The biggest advanced tank mistakes. Now let's talk about mistakes that even experienced tanks still make. Mistake number 1. Pulling too fast. Many tanks think moving faster automatically means they're playing better. Not necessarily. The fastest dungeon is the one without wipes. Pull at a pace your healer and DPS can comfortably support. Mistake number 2. Ignoring enemy abilities. Some tanks focus entirely on their own rotation. Meanwhile, dangerous enemies freely cast devastating abilities. Know which enemies need interrupts. Know which abilities require movement. Knowledge often matters more than gear. Mistake number 3. Standing still during mechanics. While unnecessary movement is bad, never moving is equally dangerous. Great tanks understand exactly when positioning should change. Adapt to mechanics instead of forcing mechanics to adapt to you. Mistake number 4. Overlapping defensive cooldowns. We've mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. Using every defensive ability simultaneously usually creates long periods where you're completely exposed. Rotate cooldowns intelligently. You'll become dramatically more durable. Mistake number 5. Tunnel vision. Many tanks stare only at their own character. Elite tanks constantly scan the battlefield. They're watching the healer's mana, enemy casts, DPS positioning, cooldown availability, patrol timers, boss mechanics. Awareness is one of the biggest differences between good and exceptional tanks. Section 11. Habits of elite tanks. So what separates the top 1% of tanks? It isn't perfect gear. It isn't always playing the strongest class. It's their habits. Elite tanks prepare before entering a dungeon. They understand routes. They know dangerous enemies. They review encounters before progression raids. They constantly improve after every run. Another common habit is reviewing mistakes. Instead of blaming the healer or blaming the DPS, they ask themselves, what could I have done differently? Maybe the pull was too large. Maybe a cooldown should have been used earlier. Maybe positioning could have been better. That mindset creates constant improvement. They're also extremely patient. A wipe doesn't frustrate them. It's simply information. Every mistake teaches them something useful for the next attempt. Finally, elite tanks are consistent. They don't rely on lucky pulls or perfect groups. They perform well no matter who they're playing with. And that's what makes them so valuable. Final thoughts. At the end of the day, tanking isn't about having the biggest health pool. It isn't about wearing the best gear. And it isn't about topping the damage meters. It's about control. Controlling enemies. Controlling the pace. Controlling dangerous situations before they become problems. The best tanks make everyone around them perform better. Your healer feels less stressed. Your DPS can focus on maximizing damage. Your group completes content more consistently. That's what great tanking looks like. So keep practicing. Learn every dungeon. Understand every boss. Review your mistakes. Master your cooldowns. And over time, you'll become the tank that every group wants to invite. And that's my complete advanced tank guide for Conquest of Azeroth. If you found this guide helpful and want more in-depth content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Conquest of Azeroth videos. I've got advanced healer guides, DPS optimization guides, profession guides, mythic dungeon strategies, raid guides, class builds, and plenty more on the way. Now I want to hear from you. What's the biggest challenge you face when tanking in Conquest of Azeroth? Is it surviving large pulls, managing threat, leading your group, or something else? Leave your answer in the comments. I read them all, and your feedback might even inspire the next guide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Conquest of Azeroth video. It's their habits. Elite tanks prepare before entering a dungeon. They understand routes. They know dangerous enemies. They review encounters before progression raids. They constantly improve after every run. Another common habit is reviewing mistakes. Instead of blaming the healer or blaming the DPS, they ask themselves, what could I have done differently? Maybe the pull was too large. Maybe a cooldown should have been used earlier. Maybe positioning could have been better. That mindset creates constant improvement. They're also extremely patient. A wipe doesn't frustrate them. It's simply information. Every mistake teaches them something useful for the next attempt. Finally, elite tanks are consistent. They don't rely on lucky pulls or perfect groups. They perform well no matter who they're playing with. And that's what makes them so valuable. Final thoughts. At the end of the day, tanking isn't about having the biggest health pool. It isn't about wearing the best gear. And it isn't about topping the damage meters. It's about control. Controlling enemies. Controlling the pace. Controlling dangerous situations before they become problems. The best tanks make everyone around them perform better. Your healer feels less stressed. Your DPS can focus on maximizing damage. Your group completes content more consistently. That's what great tanking looks like. So keep practicing. Learn every dungeon. Understand every boss. Review your mistakes. Master your cooldowns. And over time, you'll become the tank that every group wants to invite. And that's my complete advanced tank guide for Conquest of Azeroth. If you found this guide helpful and want more in-depth content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more Conquest of Azeroth videos. I've got advanced healer guides, DPS optimization guides, profession guides, mythic dungeon strategies, raid guides, class builds, and plenty more on the way. Now I want to hear from you. What's the biggest challenge you face when tanking in Conquest of Azeroth? Is it surviving large pulls, managing threat, leading your group, or something else? Leave your answer in the comments. I read them all, and your feedback might even inspire the next guide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Conquest of Azeroth video.